Sunand, welcome. There's much promise on what's going to happen on the infrastructure side in India, particularly in areas like power and telecom. To understand it a little more specifically, I'm joined by Sunand Sharma, advisor to Alstom and formerly chairman of Alstom in India. Sunand, thank you very much for speaking with us.
You're
so
welcome.
tell us, how are things looking on ground? I mean, considering that we've seen a lot of talk about things turning around in India.
Well, it's been about 4 months and a few days since the new government arrived. And for people like us who've been present in the country for over 100 years, 4 months is not as long a period as it appears to be in terms of observing and watching the results arrive. And we work in industry sectors which are long gestation period sectors, as you well know. Power and rail transport. And in both these sectors, project cycles are not counted in terms of months, they're normally counted in terms of years. So almost everything that the company is addressing, and my colleague who is now the chairman of Alstom India is better qualified than I am to say about that, but I'll give a general view of it, which is to say that most of the projects which would be tendered or which tender responses are going at this time would actually have been formulated a year or two ago. Observing what would happen in the coming future and the expectations of the future, it obviously relates to the subject which makes banner headlines almost on a daily basis somewhere or the other, which is the supply of fuel. And the supply of fuel has been on the agenda till as long as I can remember. Fundamentally, coal, which is extremely important for thermal power production, and in a smaller way, gas, which is important for the stranded gas-based power plants, and power plants which have actually in the pipeline. Not only that, not only double.
Or even on the East Coast.
Yeah, even the ones which are actually installed and which are receiving very low amounts of gas or no gas at all. And those which were in the pipeline and which never got tendered, for example, or those which got tendered, awarded and got cancelled.
Right.
That's in
so
gas.
You're saying it's not a physical infrastructure issue, but more a
More
policy,
a
supply,
policy supply issue, but the core is still fuel. The fuel for thermal power remains either coal or gas. And if I switch over to very large renewable, which is in this case hydroelectric, the problem is elsewhere. The problem is to do with a multiplicity of logic and reasons, where there are a large number of projects on the Himalayan belt and as extending into the northeast, which for multiple reasons have either got delayed or have been under construction for far too long, or those where construction has either been stopped or held up for environmental reasons, local law and order reasons. Subansiri comes to mind. So it is matters like these which really have to be dealt with. And they have to be dealt with by the union government, by the central government, and also by the state governments. And the expectation is, now that you have a government at the center with a full majority, then this government should normally have the capacity to come to grips with it and resolve these matters. So the Minister for Power, Coal and Renewable Energy, Mr. Goyal, has made clear comments to say that now that the Supreme Court case is behind, the government will be looking forward to making probably new policy statements on the subject of coal. So I think that's what needs to be resolved. And I'll close with saying that in the case of the railway ministry, at least twice in the last 6 or 7 years, there has been a promise to come with new tenders for large locomotives, electric and diesel, etc. And twice over that particular tender has not come into being. So either that tender or new tenders would have to come on, become visible for companies like ours and other large companies to respond to.
Right.
The metro space, of course, is expanding. And,
so I thought, more perhaps capacity addition is happening under the Urban Development Ministry in all the city metros than perhaps in the railways.
It's very interesting you mentioned that. It's very, very interesting you mentioned that. If you had seen a presentation made internally by me 5 years ago, I would not have predicted it. To be very honest, I would not have predicted it, because the only real metro of scale was that of Delhi. Then we saw very quickly after that metros being tendered in Mumbai, in Bangalore, in Chennai, and now some other cities as well, and expansion in Delhi taking place. I definitely recall that there were moments in time when there used to be a question mark whether India could afford metros. But I'm very happy to say, and I'm very happy to say that Bangalore is very much entrenched, Chennai is coming up, and there will be more to come. And you're right, because those decisions are more a combination of three parties, which is the lenders, who are quite comfortable with lending, in this case largely coming from Japan, and with experience of Delhi, which has been fairly successful, and then the city governments which have to make the decision, and the state governments which have to make the decision with support from the center. And you're right, I agree with you.
So
there's more action there.
So what's the outlook like for the year ahead? Given that some of these preconditions, including the desire to get things moving, seem to be in place, what needs to be done, and what's looking good?
I would stack it up like this. I go back to the beginning of my comment, which is to say the first signal to the world at large and to large corporations like ours at large would be the solution to the fuel tangle.
Okay.
That means visibility has to be there for the developers, and visibility has to be there for the machine manufacturers to see that the supply chain of fuel will be undisturbed, and it will grow in a secular manner as is expected to grow, so that predictability is there. Because we have very large factories. We are building very large factories. The equipment needs to be manufactured and needs to go to its proper destination. So that is the first agenda which needs to be resolved. Everything else will follow. And I'll just make one last comment, which is to say that you may be aware, and I think you should look at the statistics more carefully, but India in the past 5 or 6 years has established a fairly large indigenous manufacturing capability for very large power plants in the coal sector. There's adequate to supply between 20 to 30,000 megawatts of plants made locally.
Okay. If you were to now take the whole Make in India campaign forward, how is that translating into, or can it manifest itself into either more capacity or jobs and economic growth leading from that?
I think Make in India is directed heavily towards those people who have not made up their mind yet to come to India. We have been present here, as I said, for 100 years. And in the last 5 or 6 years, we've made fairly large investments in new power plant manufacturing factories, in transformer factories, in switchgear factories, and also in the metro, and a metro coach factory. So for us, the Make in India is extremely good, because whatever be the streamlining which is expected to arrive in the policy space for newcomers will adequately also apply to us. So what worries us more than anything else is the complexity of the transaction costs, the amount of time it takes to get approvals, the amount of paperwork you have to do, or the opacity of certain rules and laws, or the suddenness of the arrival of certain rules and laws, and you can't make predictions in terms of how it is. In terms of utilization of manpower, we are very skilled at that. We have grown our manpower in India hugely, and we are extremely proud of the people we have. And we've learned that even if, many people I hear, they complain about the unemployability of people who are educated in the Indian education system. Yes, it's a problem. But then for people like us, we have training methodologies by which we bring them up to speed to international standards, and they respond extremely quickly. So people are working extremely well, very quickly, in an international milieu.
Right. So what's the one thing that you would like to highlight as a task or an unfinished agenda for the year ahead? The one major thing.
I cannot say it better than the Prime Minister himself when he says that he would like his ministries to send to him lists of those rules and laws which need to be either repealed or removed. Which the underpinning of that is to smoothen the process and make it easier to do business. You see, we manufacture not only in India, we manufacture in the developed countries and other developing countries, and we also manufacture in China. Now, if we got the same set of smoothness in operations and efficiency in operations, and that includes, by the way, logistics, moving goods, port space, port adequacy, rail transportation, better roads, that whole segment, we already are competitive. I leave it to your imagination to think how much more India as a whole could become competitive if the pipes of these pipes got unclogged. Right. So, it's already a focus area, and we are looking patiently as to what are the steps the government will take in the coming months and in the year ahead to make it visible as to what the policy is.
One last question. What's the one new thing that Alstom is likely to either bring into India or innovate, or is it looking to create from its own vast R&D centers in India?
I appreciate the question, but in my present capacity as advisor to Alstom, I'm not actually the perfectly correct person to answer the question. but I can take a generic shot at it, which is to say that you must be aware, it's very public knowledge, that Alstom in India, at least the power segment of Alstom in India, is undergoing presently a process of integration with GE. So it's really, the pointer will be, and I'll leave it as a hidden answer, that you'd have to look at what GE does with R&D in India to imagine what would happen, or potentiality of what could happen.
Right. On that note, thank you so much for speaking with us. Thank you.
Thank you.